My name is Chika Oduah. I am a Nigerian-American journalist, and I am presently based in Abuja, the capital city of Nigeria. That's a good question. I do believe that they're all linked. I'm passionate about dance. I'm passionate about filmmaking, documentary, pictures, and also anthropology. I think the connection with all of these things is that it tells the stories of people. What is Africa for me? Africa is home. Africa is a treasure that has not received its due credit. Africa is a misunderstood place. Africa is ancient. And Africa has many secrets to discover. I think the misunderstanding comes from the fact that the world is split, between powers. Right now, Africa is really not in power when it comes to global politics. We still have the voices of the former colonialists speaking for many African countries. You look at Francophone Africa and you see what's happening with the economy, how much Francophone Africa contributes to the French economy. So I think that's the reason why it's misunderstood. We still don't have Africans telling the stories of what's happening. The people who are telling the stories are non-Africans who may have not really grasped what the culture is about, not grasp the historical context of Africa. Well, I think the culture actually is one of Nigeria's greatest exports. The music and the movies, Nollywood is now the largest producing cinema industry in the world, After that is Bollywood and Hollywood, so we have that. I do think the media is picking up those stories, but art is not always a focus for news. News usually is about conflict and politics. Art usually takes a backseat. But I think that some people have been paying attention to Nigerian arts and culture, which is great. Talking to someone recently, and they were surprised. They said that the common misperception that people have in Europe about Africa is that there's no middle class. Everyone in Africa is either very poor or very rich. There's a huge middle class. People who are going to the movie theaters to watch cinema, people who are playing basketball or soccer on the street, people who are falling in love and going to dances. My family, we're middle class. I have uncles who are professors and teachers and nurses. The middle class is what you'll see in Nollywood, and that's what people can learn. So Nollywood is a tool to teach people what the reality is of life in Nigeria. Well, Boko Haram is getting weaker. They're losing manpower. And this is because of the regional task force. Soldiers from Cameroon, from Niger, from Nigeria, and from Chad have all come together to help fight Boko Haram, and that's been great. But what's happening is I believe Boko Haram is now going underground. And underground, they can be very dangerous. They can be recruiting people one-on-one, hiding in towns, hiding in the villages, hiding in the cities of Maiduguri, which is where the movement started. My experience in Chibok, I've been twice. I plan to go again because I think it's important to follow up on what is a moving story. Some people may believe that the Chibok story is dead. There's no way we're going to find these girls. I disagree. I believe it's a moving story and it needs to continue to be followed up. Even though it's no longer on the front page news, the Bring Back Our Girls movement is no longer trending, but it's up to journalists to keep the pressure and to keep the voices of these parents who are in Chibok, keep their voices alive in the media. So the first time I went, it was shortly after the girls were kidnapped. And what I saw was a community in mourning. It was really poignant to see their expression on their faces. It was pure sadness, and confusion. How could this have happened? How could almost 300 girls just go like that in the middle of the night? And what was very beautiful about the Chibok people is their resilience. They've come together as a community and they're not giving up the fight. They have a spirit of activism. Well, I don't actually have an overwhelming sense of fear. No, I'm very careful. I am very aware of the dangers, but I don't like fear to paralyze me, or else I can't do my job. You know, the scariest part of reporting really is traveling to northeastern Nigeria, which is the epicenter of Boko Haram. And the drive from Abuja is about 13 hours. And the drive is very lonely sometimes. And you're driving through villages that have been burnt down by Boko Haram. And you can see schools that have been burnt down from Boko Haram. So on your left, on your right, on the road, you're seeing skeletons of buildings. You're seeing abandoned homes. And you can feel the stories that are coming from these homes. You can feel the ghost of these villages. And you can imagine the people who ran away in fear because they heard Boko Haram shouting. That's the scariest part, going through these empty villages. And it's just like, oh gosh, because some of these villages have been taken over by Boko Haram. They could be living in those houses, eating the crops that were being produced by the farmers there. They make use of those villages that they've taken over. So that's the scariest part, but I try to be positive, again, because I believe that negative thinking, it doesn't help you to do your work. It's a disturbance. Their modus operandi changes. You know, in its early days, the way they made money was by robbing banks, a lot of bank robberies. We don't see that too much nowadays. Nowadays, they're really going into villages and looting, especially livestock. You know, the cows, the chickens, they're taking those things, perhaps selling them. Also, they're using young girls. That's another technique that they've been using. And the way they use young girls in Nigeria, it's unprecedented. The way Boko Haram uses young girls. No other terrorist group in the world has used young girls in the way that Boko Haram has. Even terrorist groups in Asia, you know, in the 80s, they weren't using them the way they're using them now. So that's a new thing that we're seeing. And I think it's a very simple tactic to lure a 9-year-old girl, hey, come. Do you want to do the work of God? Yeah. Do you want to carry this bomb on your chest? Yeah, this is what you do. It's so easy. It's the easiest thing you can do. And they're really just going after easy targets because they're not educated and they need the money. So if Boko Haram calls a girl and say, if you do this, I will compensate your family. I'll give the money to your father. Since you're going to die and go to heaven, your parents will get the money. Of course, anyone wants to help their parents. And these people sound like freedom fighters. They sound like revolutionaries, like they're fighting for righteousness. That's the way Boko Haram may sound to someone who doesn't know otherwise. It needs to be a holistic approach. There needs to be the military strategy, and there needs to be a psychological strategy to really get into the mentalities of people, what they're thinking, their philosophy. And there has to be a communal strategy, going to the communities, talking to the Muslim clerics, talking to the village elders, and really keeping an eye out. And this has been happening actually in a place like Maiduguri, the capital of Borno State, the birthplace of Boko Haram. That's been happening. The people have become wiser to the terrorism that Boko Haram has committed. Before, they used to welcome Boko Haram. Now they're like, no more. We know better now. And they've done a good job. They've really done a good job by using young men, vigilantes, to scout Boko Haram suspects living in the community, and they say, no, get out. Challenges facing Nigeria? Right now, it's the economy. That's the biggest thing, the economy. Of course, Nigeria is a petrol-driven economy. We rely 80% of our GDP on oil. And of course, oil prices have fallen, so that's the biggest thing now. Of course, we're still dealing with conflict, not just in the Northeast, but now in the South, where the oil is produced. We have thugs coming back up. The Niger Delta violence has spurred back up. We're seeing kidnappings again. So in the north, we're having issues. In the south, we're having issues. We hear that Boko Haram. So I think security and the economy are the biggest challenges that Nigeria is still facing. Of course, the issue of women, gender inequality. A nation cannot progress if half of its population are not allowed access to health care, access to education. So the story of Nigeria will not see a better future until women and girls have equal access.